Okay, good morning everybody. I hope that you can all see me and also my slides. A really warm welcome to this quarterly research meeting. We've got a full house and we've also got a really full programme. So I'm just going to, for those that don't know me, I'm Ashley Adamson and I'm Director of Fuse. And was also the PI for this project that we're going to talk to you about and hopefully get your insights on, which is the Local Authority Champions of Research, or LACoR project, which was about embedding a research culture in local government. The project was funded by the Health Foundation, and Mandy and Sam and Claire are going to tell you a lot more about that. But we have got a project that is going to be building on this, and we really need your insights into to help us for that application, which is a UKPRP application to go in December. So just as usual for Fuse, you've got the hashtag. Please tweet as we go through the programme, and also our website. So I'm just going to, I hope, there we go. Okay, so just a couple of housekeeping before we start. Please could you ensure your microphone is muted? I think Mark has done that for everybody, but you can obviously unmute. So please keep it muted unless you come to speak. You can stop your own video, just it helps with the data streaming, but please do put it on if you're speaking, so we can see you. It's nice to see faces. During the presentation and the Q&A, you can type your questions into the chat box, and I'll be curating some of those to start the discussion with the speakers, but please do also enter the discussion verbally if you wish, but do use the chat box. If you want to speak, please could you raise your hand using the participant sidebar, and then we should be able to see everybody. I'll try and have everybody on screen. If you feel that someone is behaving inappropriately or is a cause for concern, then please message Ruth Wilson, who'll come up in the participants and in the chat, but hopefully that will not be necessary, and I think it goes without saying that we expect the chat to be professional. So after that that usual housekeeping, this is the programme for the day. We're going to very shortly have Mandy speak, and Sam, who were both research associates on the LACoR project, and Mandy now is research fellow for the ARC based at Northumbria University, and Sam Redgate is research associate and is also working on the UKPRP that I just mentioned. We then got a response from Claire from the INSANS team at Newcastle City Council, who worked as part of the LACoR project. We've got a brief 10-minute Q&A, and then, as if by magic, and I'm sure many people are used to this by now, you'll be put into some groups, and we've got some specific questions with leads, facilitators, and note takers for you to make some comments, and we'll be finished by 11 o'clock. So I think at that stage, unless anybody has any questions, we're just going to move on. And before I do that, just an advert again, a common event on QRMs, a quick advert just to remind you that we have a physical activity pop-up workshop, and we have the very prestigious speaker of Jim Salas from University of California speaking, and you can register on the Fuse website. So please do that. You'd be really welcome to join that session, which proves, I'm sure, will be a really interesting session, and a coup for us to have Jim Salas speaking. So without further ado, I'm going to now pass over to Mandy. Mandy, I hope you're able to now share your slides. Mandy and Sam will speak one after each other, and then we'll pause whilst I introduce Clare Humble. So I hope you enjoy the morning, and Mandy, over to you.
Hi everybody, sorry, I'm just putting on my screen share. So can everybody see me all right?
We can, Mandy, you just need to go to full screen. Just onto a full PowerPoint, that you're in there.
Mandy, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Great, sorry. My name is Mandy Cheetham and I'm going to talk through the findings from the Local Authority Champions of Research project that we worked on in 2019, funded by the Health Foundation. So all of the fieldwork was done before COVID hit. I'm sorry, I'm having some problems changing slides. There we go. So here you can see the members of the research team listed on the left-hand side. And as Ashley said, we worked very closely with Clare from Newcastle City Council, who was part of the research team and acted as a very skillful organisational navigator alongside Sam, Laura and Peter. And then on the right-hand side, you can see Ashley as our principal investigator alongside colleagues from our local government partners. And it's important to say that we worked very closely in collaboration with colleagues in local government, and several members of the research team also had experience of working in local government themselves, which really helped, I think, with our the approach that we took. So we know that the transition of public health to local government in 2013 presented both challenges and opportunities for evidence use. We know that austerity and public sector funding cuts have made a massive impact on local government and the wider system. So there are less resources for evaluation, reduced capacity, and perhaps an increased focus on using research and evidence wisely. And a renewed focus on prevention and the wider determinants of health, I think, present a need for new methodological approaches, including those that take a complex systems approach with its focus on relationships and feedback loops and a non-linear approach. So recognises the messy context of policy making in local government. So we were interested in how to embed a research culture in local government, and we defined a research culture as a system which facilitates transdisciplinary working and harnesses the broadest range of different types of evidence for local authority decision making. So that's really in recognition that evidence is only one of the factors that influences decision making in local government. So these are it was a mixed method study that we used, and this is a flavour of the methods. I won't have time to talk through all of them. I'm going to focus more on the qualitative interviews, and Sam's going to talk through the logic model. But just to explain what we did a rapid review of the literature, so the published academic studies that had looked at facilitating research use in local government, and also an online scoping survey of approaches to evidence use, including embedded research. We wanted to develop a prototype logic model, which was informed by data from 3 facilitated workshops in our 3 case study sites on topics that were selected as priorities by colleagues in local government. And we then did a follow-up workshop where we refined the model and also undertook the interviews in one of the case study sites that I'm going to talk through. We had the opportunity to learn from an embedded researcher working alongside colleagues in Newcastle Gateshead to explore arts-based activities, and that work is ongoing. And we also felt it was really important to test different evaluation approaches. So we tried out a complex system mapping at one of the workshops in Belfast, helped by Harry Rutter, that many of you will know, and undertook a social network analysis with workshop participants, and that was led by colleagues in Queen's University Belfast. So I'm going to very briefly talk through the main findings from the rapid review, and I'm happy to share slides afterwards so you can follow up these references if you'd like to. So we know that multiple different types of evidence are used in local government, and different value is placed often on those. And sometimes there's a disconnect between what policymakers and practitioners and academics might view as robust evidence. It was very clear from the literature that an understanding of context and a focus on how evidence is produced locally was really important. So rather than focusing on how necessarily guidelines are imported, a look at how evidence is blended, with a heavy emphasis on local evidence being prioritised often over national. We know that public health is shaped by political and legal constraints, and that means that what's possible in one local authority may well not reflect the options in others, and it also necessitates the involvement of elected members. And in keeping with lots of the evidence from the co-production literature, we also know that personal contacts and trusting relationships are crucial, and more recently that's been reflected in some of the published literature on embedded research. So I'm just going to talk through some of the quotes from the local authority interviewees that we spoke to, which reflect much of what we found in the literature. So there's absolutely a sense of different microcultures of evidence use between different departments. So in the blue speech bubble, you can see some departments see real value in research and analysis, and some departments don't. So that suggests that tailoring our approaches both within and between local authorities is the best approach. And recognition, I think, that the speed of decision making in local government is a really important consideration, that people are often moving to the next decision without necessarily having the time and the space to explore what the evidence is telling us. And suggesting, I think, it's very much down to capacity. So people in local government feeling that they didn't necessarily have the time and the space to explore what the evidence is telling us, but actually participating in a research project could sometimes generate those conversational spaces which could help and could make a difference. And we also had some lovely examples of skilled staff with analytical skills and abilities and experience within local government already working with colleagues in other teams. So encouraging people to think differently about the data that they use, and building understanding as opposed to just counting beans, which is not always the most helpful. There were some very important messages for academia as well as for practice. Reflected again by the quote in the blue bubble, what I really want is academics who want to partner and who care about the outcome. So a very firm message about partnership approaches, academics and researchers being part of a team. And that's what encouraged this participant to veer more towards embedded approaches rather than necessarily commissioned research. And again, some assumptions made about local government staff from academics. So there's a lot of really skilled and talented and competent people in local authorities, and maybe some academics and some researchers need to deal with their own perceptions before they can engage fully. And again, recognition that in terms of change, sometimes the most important people are not necessarily the ones at the top of the organisation. Leadership was very important, and setting the tone and the context was important, but having people with the right skills and the right mindsets and the right attitudes was also really important. And change was possible then by levering potential influence throughout the organisation. So I'm going to hand over to Sam now, who's going to talk you through the logic model and some of the main findings. If you have any questions, by all means put them in the chat, and the full report is available on the Fuse website alongside a Fuse brief if you're interested. Thanks, Sam.
Right, hopefully everyone can see my screen. So sort of building on what, oh sorry, I realised I haven't got my video on. There we go. Right, so sort of building on what Mandy mentioned about and sort of based on all the data that we collected, we pulled together a logic model, and this logic model that's presented here on the screen was developed really as a visual for the identified system components and the contextual factors that prompt action, but also facilitate feedback in relation to embedding a culture of evidence use within local government. And it should be noted, and you've probably noticed, this isn't a simple linear logic model. Instead, we've attempted to try to capture the complexity of the local government system in the development of our logic model, which I'll talk you through now. What we've done here as well is you'll note that context spans the whole of the logic model, and we've got external context in the grey box at the top and internal context at the bottom. And this really is the fact that context factors in this sense sort of describe the features of the conditions that the interventions are introduced. And so they're relevant really to the inputs leading to the outputs, outcomes and impact. So for example, political steer at a national level, or also institutional memory within the local authority level have quite an impact on what goes on. So looking firstly at the inputs within this model, the inputs identified here relate to the combination of the resources offered by embedding a culture of evidence use within the local government. And we split the input components between macro, which is at sort of the national level, such as national reporting requirements, meso, sort of local authority level, which includes, for example, links between departments within the local authority itself, and then down at the bottom, the micro level, and this is sort of at the individual level, and this includes things such as individual staff support and supervision. Within the model as well, we've identified the three emerging core themes and colour-coded them as such. So we have data usage, which is in yellow, people in blue and collaboration in green. And what we've done as well here is related components within the model have been grouped. So for example, there were clear links between local authority and universities working together with honorary arrangements, visiting university status, and also sort of accommodation access and co-location. So moving on to the outputs. Outputs here aren't directly linked to the input components in a linear fashion. Rather, we've grouped them, so under the data usage, people and collaboration. So for example, the combination of the data usage inputs are thought to lead to the data usage outputs. And we've done this because the links between the system elements are dependent on the context in which they're being viewed. And so therefore sort of the core intervention inputs, outputs and outcomes rather than a precise list of activities and resources have been stated within the model. And we've done this to allow for sort of variation across different settings. So moving on to the outcomes, as with the outputs, the outcomes have also been grouped under the core themes. And this allows for the flexible facilitation, sort of illustrating links between implementation and context within the complex and often adaptive nature of local government. It was interesting to know when we were looking at the outcomes, how they've affected the elements of embedding a culture of evidence at different system levels. And therefore we've pulled out the outcomes in relation to micro, meso and macro where appropriate. You'll see data usage and people outcomes, the yellow and the blue boxes on the screen, were very much seen at the micro and meso levels. So for example, we looked at improved confidence in and the broader range of data was seen. Whereas collaboration, which is the box in green at the bottom, prompted more of a whole systems effect. And so this was seen very much more at sort of the meso and the macro levels. And so some of these outcomes in relation to sort of public accountability, funding access, public involvement, for example. Impacts here shown at the very right of the screen are the result of the enactment of the outcomes and include features such as increased use of research, increased public confidence and research-driven policy. And I think it's important to note at this stage that as systems are developed and as they're refined within local government in response to the notion of embedding a culture of evidence use, they start to establish properties and powers of their own. It's not a static model. So moving on here, what we tried to do was pull out sort of the principles for building an evidence-informed policy and practice in local government. And we've grouped this around four key points. So the first one, conceptual clarity. There's very much a need to define the problem together, drawing on multiple perspectives. This could be perspectives from people within different teams in the local authority, perspectives from universities, sort of pulling everyone together, and also the acknowledgement of what counts as evidence may vary. And that's not just between maybe sort of research university-based institutions and local government. It may also be between teams within local authorities. So co-production, there's very much a need to engage in dialogue from the outset, not as something that happens at the end. And also to this idea of creating conversational spaces to have that time to talk about the work that's going on. Co-design, as sort of alluded to in the logic model, it needs to be flexible and not a detailed roadmap. And there needs to be this idea and acknowledgement that sort of context will impact on what's happening. And also there's a need to recognise and develop the assets and the expertise which people bring to the team. And in terms of culture, very much we got through was this idea of don't just parachute in. We don't want university staff going into the local authority in different cultures and vice versa. Sort of very much a need to build an organisational culture, one of which that can test out ideas. So just sort of looking at the conclusions, it's important really to note that the structures, the architecture, the people and the process are going to vary according to context, and therefore researchers need to take account of this and build in the assets and the political priorities in place. Not all local authorities will look the same, and therefore not one size will fit all. Embedding the research culture really does depend on the context and the organisational culture. There's a need to find an approach that fits best. And again, sort of going back to this notion of what fits one might not fit another, and therefore we need to evaluate accordingly. And researchers are very much needed as part of a multi-agency team working alongside research users, policymakers and commissioners within local governments. And so just finally, sort of to look at some takeaway messages, we've split these out between local government, academia and research funders. So first of all, sort of looking at local government, there are pressures on capacity. And so to make spaces and capacity for reflections between departments in order to encourage evidence use in decision making. There's also a need to build on existing assets such as research champions, staff research skills and qualifications, and knowledge and expertise across local governments in applying this evidence. We need to proactively engage with universities and individual academics in order to share values. And then there's also a need to embed research that can improve links between policy and practice with the right approach, but taking account that this may be limited in its sphere of influence. In terms of universities, there's a need to sort of go where the evidence is, where the energy is, identify individuals and teams that want to create change. Context is everything. You need to take account of the social, the political, the financial, regulatory and legal context of local government and spend time with decision makers really to understand this context. And need to strive for an appropriate balance between academic rigour and timeliness in order to co-produce research for decision making. And then lastly, looking at research funders, there's a need to increase investment in meaningful co-production opportunities. And also looking to adapt funding infrastructure to local government needs, thinking more about being responsive, rapid evaluations, and also flexible timescales, for example. And just finally, to acknowledge that the research here, as Mandy and Ashley have already mentioned, was taken in collaboration with a number of other individuals. Thanks. I'll pass you back to Ashley.
Thank you to Mandy and to Sam. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to pass over to Clare Humble. Clare works at Newcastle City Council as Insight Manager, but during the LACoR project was seconded to work with the Health Foundation study team, and we were really privileged to have Clare's expertise, and she's continued to work with us in the new plans for Enable, and also has been really successful in gaining some additional funding from Newcastle City Council, and also to funding to undertake a PhD herself. So we're really excited about being able to continue to work with Claire, but she's just going to give a response in her perspective of having been involved in the LACoR project. So Claire, if you'd like to share your screen, and over to you.
Brilliant, thanks Ashley. Let me just share this screen. So hopefully everybody can see that. I'm going to take the silence as a yes. So yes,
Yep, good to you.
Thank you. So I'm Clare Humble. I'm the Insights Manager at Newcastle City Council, and I lead the Insights team. And our function as a team is really quite broad range, and so everything from statutory business intelligence type functions and statutory returns right through to driving forward the research agenda within the local authority. So I think for us, the LACoR project it came at a really, really good time, I think, and we really wanted to better understand how we could embed a culture of research within the council. And we saw the opportunities as just a real opportunity to understand internally how colleagues viewed evidence and its role within the council, understand what some of the barriers are to think about, and think about ways that we could overcome them, because we did know anecdotally that barriers, were in place to evidence use. It was a really good opportunity to work with academic colleagues and strengthen these links and work and relationships. Test new ways of working to inform current approaches, and really just to highlight some of the work that we already do. I think we also recognise that there were really potentially significant benefits to us as an organisation in terms of both being involved with this work, but then taking the learning from this work and putting that into practice. So, we recognise that potential benefits were an increased quality of service. As a research active organisation, we're more likely to question what it is that we deliver and how we commission services. It's an opportunity for income generation in terms of external funding opportunities for research, which is not something that ordinarily we necessarily tap into. Great opportunities for staff development and to retain some of the really excellent staff that we have, and to support recruitment of new staff, and opportunities for secondments, both ways, I guess, through academia and to local authority. So in terms of how we use research and, I suppose, knowledge in the City Council, we've got a wide range of people who are generating and using data and evidence within their work. And we've really significantly invested in this capacity, both through the creation of roles. So the Insights team specifically is quite a large team, but also in terms of investing in CPD opportunities for colleagues to formalise their skills in research and analysis. And a key way, I guess, of how we did this was co-developing a postgraduate certificate and masters with colleagues at Northumbria University a few years back. We recognise the need for evidence in its broader sense, as Mandy and Sam highlighted in their presentation, to be used in decision making, and we proactively work with directors and senior officers to support its use. There are, however, challenges in doing this, and again, Mandy and Sam touched upon these in their presentation, but there is that tension, I suppose, between balancing the statutory requirements and research activity. So research activity is sometimes, and this is by all means, it's not across the council, it can be in certain departments, but there is a view sometimes that research activity is nice to have, but not necessarily something that we're paid to do from or funded to do from central government. So there is a real tension between the nice to have and the must do in terms of those statutory requirements. But also the little things, I guess, which aren't so little, I suppose, but in terms of accessing published research. So if it's a a paid for journal. We don't have access to that, so that's tricky. And accessing research funding, and whilst this is improving, it is difficult for local authorities to access funding purely for research purposes. But I suppose if I just go back, despite these challenges, I think, you know, we've really sort of embraced the opportunity to get involved in this work, and I think we are in a position of strength within Newcastle, really, in terms of our starting point. And what was really great about this project was that there was a real appetite amongst colleagues across the council, both in research roles and outside of that, to get involved in this work through the workshops, through interviews, and for me personally as part of the research team. It was a really great opportunity for everyone to get involved, share their experiences and their views, and to help shape what a research culture within local government could look like. And like I said before, I think there was also an element of demonstrating how we do already use evidence within our practice. It just probably isn't as visible. So in terms of how we've used the findings, I think importantly, this has really raised the profile of analysis and research within the organisation, and particularly amongst senior leaders, highlighting the existing good practice, but also opportunities going forward for the service. And I think as part of this, we've really strengthened the research narrative, I suppose, both within the work that we do, but in terms of job adverts that we've put out, we've really strengthened that, and we've really noticed a change in the people who are applying for our research roles. And I think, you know, it is research within local government is a career option, but it's perhaps not as visible as in other sectors. So I think strengthening that research narrative internally and externally through job adverts has really benefited, and we really have received some really high caliber applications for the research jobs that we've advertised. I think we've really strengthened links with academic partners, and I think this has provided new opportunities to collaborate and share good practice. And I think, you know, as Ashley mentioned just before, it's really provided a really strong foundation for our successful research bids in 1920. As I said, this research funding for local authorities, certainly in my experience, has not been easy to get or particularly visible even. And we've been successful in 1920 for 3 research bids, so one with the Youth Justice Board. And this is a really, really exciting one for me, because with this funding, we've been able to appoint a full-time embedded researcher just to look and work on this project. And we're working with colleagues at Northumbria University to co-produce this. But, and I suppose this is the case for all of these bids, importantly, the local authority was the lead applicant with support from academic partners. We've had successful bids for the into NIHR School of Social Care Research, like Ashley said, to fund a part-time PhD. And we've also recently received funding for a short-term piece of work. But this has really provided us with the opportunity to dedicate some time to developing a research infrastructure within the local authority and understanding what that might look like in terms of staffing structures, in terms of the development of a research governance framework, what those internal processes look like in terms of submitting research bids. And all of this together is really enabling us to be a research active organisation as well as a host. So I think, you know, the findings from this work have been put into practice, and yeah, just very, very valuable.
Okay, so thank you, Claire, Mandy, and Sam. And I hope that from that you can see first of all the tremendous achievement that Claire and her colleagues have been able to do in terms of progressing from the work they've done and the success they've had this year, in additional research funding, but also I think from all of them the value of some of that engagement and working together.